With the metal painted and the details done, it's time to get the armor painted blue. Now the base paint for the Ultramarines is this McCrag blue, and I want to get a base of that down, so I'm going to put it on in multiple thin coats. I'm going to thin the paint down with some water and get it on there very smooth, several coats to cover it. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me a nice smooth foundation for the paint to come afterwards. I've thinned the paint with some Lamian medium, which is basically a matte medium. And what it does is it allows the paint to be thinned, but not to be where the pigments are so spread out like it would be with water, where they start breaking apart. You see, I'm just giving that a very, very thin coat. It's not completely covering, but that's okay. I want this to go down in very thin, very smooth layers. And I'm generally just painting one section at a time. I'm not going back over it if I can help it, although I've missed a couple of spots. I probably need to reload my brush. I'll just get this painted on here like this, and then once that first coat is on, I'll move on to the second, and the coverage will be much better with that one. Now, a step I like to take when I'm brush painting is after the first layer is on, just get a piece of soft cloth and just lightly buff that first layer of paint on these more flat open areas. Can't get to all the areas. Some of them are a little too small, but this just buffs it out and takes care of any little brush strokes or inconsistencies in the paint and gets it ready for the next layer. And it doesn't take up much paint at all, if any. Now I'll come back in with a second coat. That's going to cover much better. It's still very thin. It's going to cover more areas though. And I'll let that dry and see if I need another one. If you're going for a more patchy look, thin your paint down a little bit on this second coat, and it'll let some of that streakiness from the first coat show through and give you kind of a distressed look. All right, now that I've got the base of the blue painted on there, I want to do some modulation. And the key area on the model that the modulation is going to be based on is right here at this point. There's just a little bit of damage that I want to kind of feature. So I want to do the modulation so it draws attention there. Now, modulation is different than something like, say, zenithal highlighting. Zenithal highlighting is where you paint the whole model in a darker color, and then you may spray or paint it so that some of the surfaces are then a lighter color, and then from the very top you have an even lighter color. Imagine a black with gray at about a 45-degree angle sprayed on it, and then white directly from above. That simulates true lighting from straight above. Modulation seeks to take the lighting down to the various panel levels, where the idea is not to do necessarily realistic lighting, but something to differentiate the panel using lighting techniques. I did a whole video about it. There'll be a link up here, hopefully, if I remember, that you can dive into that further. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this area up here lighter, and so there'll be a gradient from dark to light. And then there'll be another gradient, but I'm going to go from dark to light this way. So I won't have light here and light here. I'll have light up here and dark right here. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a great differentiation between the two panels. So it'll draw the eye there to see that damage, but it'll also make a distinction so that they appear as different things. It's not, again, it's not attempting to be realistic in terms of lighting, but rather it's an attempt to differentiate areas. And then on the rest of the model, I'll use the direction that I have the gradients going here to kind of drive how it's going to be on everything else. So there will be, up here, there will be darker and then lighter, darker and then lighter. And then here, I'll actually kind of do the lighter down here and then bring it up so that it's dark, so that it highlights this edge. The shadow that's there is going to create the distinction between the two parts is going to create some natural separation there, so I'll actually reverse it. So it's really about differentiating the different panels using light and shade and color. And I've got some Citadel Calgar blue in my palette, and I've thinned it down fairly heavily with water, about 3 parts water to 1 part paint. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get some on my brush and work most of it off. And then I'm just going to start down here near the bottom. And I'm just going to begin putting on that color almost from the very bottom all the way to the top. Now I draw the strokes from the bottom to the top so that it deposits the most paint at the top, at the end of each stroke. I just go in and clean those up where I see little gaps. And then I go on to, normally I would go on to this section, and then this section, and then this section, and maybe some of the others. And by the time I got around to this first one, it would be dry again. And then I can reload my brush. And I think there's been enough time for it to dry. You'll know it's not had enough time to dry if when you start putting the next layer over it, it starts tearing the skin of the paint off. You'll know you're doing it too soon. So I may run into that here because I'm living dangerously. But I'm just going to start a little further up this time. And again, begin to draw that paint up there. Now what I'm doing is I'm just adding very thin layers over the top of each other so that it builds up the color as it goes up the surface. Now eventually I'll get to where I'm just doing a very brief amount of paint, very small amount of paint right up there at the top, and that's going to be the brightest. If you remember, if you keep up with my videos and you saw the one that I did for the Impulsor, you remember the leather seats that I did. Same technique really, just drawing paint in thin layers and progressively bringing it up so that by the time you get your final layers where you're just doing a few up here at the top, it's going to get it almost to the pure color that you're working with. So let me continue just adding these on here. And I'll just, once it dries, I'll go, I'll start here and then about here and then about here and then about here and then about there and then about there. And you can decide how much is enough. There's no right or wrong way for the different gradients to start. You may only need 4 steps on a shorter area. On a longer area, you may need more. The idea, though, is to try and keep a fairly smooth gradient between the bottom and the top. All right, you can see how that looks, and it just gives some differentiation between the panels. It suggests volume and light. I even changed it up a bit. I thought I was going to do the gradient from dark to light this way, but I decided to do it the opposite on these parts right here, just to help differentiate them from the parts on either side. So I've kind of reversed the gradients there. So it doesn't follow necessarily a logical pattern of where the light would be, but rather something that helps differentiate the panels of the model and helps bring out features and all of that. Now, by itself, it's going to be kind of stark, but when I start adding in weathering and more paint distressing and things like that, what it'll do is it will allow those lighter areas to still show some difference, because when we add weathering, it tends to darken things down. It tends to blend things in. And if you're not careful, the weathering can just start hiding, I guess you'd say, various features and things like that. So by boosting up the colors in certain areas, it helps ensure that those things will be seen. Now, there are other ways to do this. Of course, you could do this with an airbrush and get a much smoother gradient than I've gotten here. Certainly, I don't I don't hold any illusions that my gradient here is as good as could be done with an airbrush. You could do this with dry brushing. You could actually do a combination of the paint brushing and then blending it in a bit with a dry brush, or reversing that. There's a lot of ways to do this, but the main point is this can be done with a brush in such a way that it differentiates the panels and gives just kind of a bigger look to the model. And certainly, like anything, it takes practice. It's obviously a technique that I'm still practicing. I still work on this. And the only way to get better at it is to do it over and over and over and over again. So that's why I do these things. But I hope it's helped demonstrate that it's not difficult. It just simply takes a little bit of patience and just a little bit of paint. And you can push it around on the model and get it like you want. And the great thing is, because you're brush painting, if you don't like what's happening, you're just a few brush strokes away from the base color of resetting it back like you want it and starting over. So it's very easy to recover from. But in the next video, I'll continue on with this, and I'm planning to get it wrapped up in the next video. So mostly the weathering that's left to do. I'll do a little bit of detail painting off camera, and next time it'll be mostly the weathering. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. If you're still hanging around at this point, I'm really grateful. I always appreciate those who hang in till the end, so thank you very much, and I appreciate that. Of course, you know the drill. There's a link down over here that you can hit to subscribe if you've not already done so. There's a little bell icon that you can mash to get notified whenever I have new videos out. There's a comment area down below. I'd be grateful if you would leave the video a comment and maybe give it a like. And there's also links to my blog and to social media and to Patreon. If you would like to support the work that I do, I'd be grateful if you would click on that Patreon link and see what is offered there and see if some of that might interest you. And if you're already a Patreon supporter, thank you so much for the support that you give. It's a blessing to me, it's a blessing to my family, and it makes what I do possible. I couldn't do it without your support, not at the pace that I do it with the models and the materials and the things like that. Yeah, I'd still model, but it would be a much different picture. So thank you to all the patrons who step up each month and make this possible. I am grateful. And I'll leave you with one final thought, as I always like to do. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.